Sales conversations where both buyers and sellers win are rare and plagued by the cringe. We've all felt it. It's that sinking feeling that both buyer and seller get when the conversation is going off the rails. My name is Adam Clay. I'm the CEO of Rainmakers. I've spent 25 years building and leading global sales organizations and thinking about the sales conversation. At The Cringe, we put the sales conversation under the microscope and explore pathways to ensuring sales reps, leaders, and managers conduct great sales conversations. So today, my guest is Lori Richardson, CEO and founder of Score More Sales. She's also the author of She Sells: Attract, Promote, and Retain Great Women in B2B Sales. Lori, welcome to The Cringe.
Hey, Adam, it's so good to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you. If you don't mind, could you start by telling us a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in sales my whole life, pretty much. And in my adult life, I started as a teacher, and then I got into sales in my early 20s, had a great sales career, a little bit of sales leadership, and then I launched my own sales strategy firm about 20 years ago. And so, I wanted to help companies solve sales issues. And what we do is we use data to help figure out the health of a sales team, and then we will prescribe from that, coach, train, and consult based on the data that we find out.
All right. And have you found that your background in education has helped you over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always wanted to be a teacher from the time I was young, and in its best sense, training and working, the work that I do with sales teams, it's teaching and it's learning. I learn every day. I'm sure you do too, in all the different things that we do and the different folks that we're around. There's a lot of learning going on, whether it's being taught or being absorbed by me. So I do totally feel that I'm surrounded by education.
All right. And tell us a little bit at the start, what inspired you to write the book last year?
I wrote She Sells because I had been giving out very tactical advice to sales leaders and company leaders in small, mid-size, and enterprise-sized companies for a number of years. In 2015 is when I realized that there was a big gap with the lack of women in sales in just about every level, especially as you go higher up. And so I've, over the years, talked to a lot of leaders about how to hire better, how to retain better, how to onboard, and what, women are looking for in a sales role and in a sales leadership role. So the book was really a way to put it all together and just be more concise with tips and ideas and strategies that people have found very helpful.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll plug the book here. I read it. I loved it. I think everybody should read it. So it comes with my highest recommendation. I thought it was a wonderful piece.
Thank
you for doing that. All right. Well, I want to return to the topic of women in sales, specifically as it pertains to sales conversations. But I'd be remiss if I didn't start with one of the hallmark questions on the show, and that is this. So when you are involved or observing sales conversations, what makes you cringe?
And I could only pick one thing, right? I would say ultimately the worst thing, what really makes me cringe, is when reps are poorly trained and they say very canned things that it's so obvious and is so methodical that it helps perpetuate that term salesy. I like to think of sales as an admirable profession. Sales is helping. So I'm always working to help change that so that it's not so canned and that we're truly listening and trying to help our buyers to buy.
That's a theme that we've heard from time to time on The Cringe. I'd love to get your perspective on why that is. Like, how have so many members of such an admirable profession, to use your term, come to the conclusion that in a conversation, the right thing to do is to pitch, often using a canned story. Why is that?
Yeah, well, that phrase show up and throw up. I mean, I've heard that for more than I'm going to say 15 years. So it's not a new thing, but the idea that you can just regurgitate information. I was at a hotel lobby yesterday in Phoenix, and I heard this guy doing that very thing to the poor person that was sitting at the table, who I assume is a prospective buyer. And I was just like, oh, that's cringeworthy. And how it happened, I don't know, Adam. I mean, I'd love to know what you think, because for years, especially when the economy was super strong, it seemed like people could say just about anything and people would buy from them. And now that everyone's tightened their belts, and we're more selective and we have less people to work with, we really have to take a hard look at that. It's clear that if you don't listen to your buyer, and if you don't understand how you can add value, it's pointless to try to offer them anything, because you're not going to be differentiated. And if you can't help, I mean, why even bother, is my opinion.
I think in there you asked for my perspective on this,
Yeah.
and I'd love to give it to you, but only to invite your perspective on what I'm about to say. I think it's got something to do with the fact that historically, salespeople were the principal conveyor of companies' product information into the marketplace, right? Pre-web, pre-digital media. If you wanted to learn about a company's product, any product, you had to talk to a salesperson. And in order to be successful, if that's the value that you're adding to a buyer, to tell them about your product and features and benefits, you know, the better you can talk about your product, the more prolifically you can talk about the product, the more effective you're going to be. But that's changed dramatically in the last couple of decades. Buyers can learn just about anything they want about a company's product online, and they can talk to your customers without you even knowing that they're going to talk to your customers. And so they can learn about your company very intimately. And so the value that a customer gives, which I think exists in the dimensions that you're describing here and now, hasn't quite permeated, the sales profession. Like, we're still, as a profession, burning off some old ideas about what the value of a salesperson is. And, I tend to think that the value has to do with uncovering and understanding of what the customer's circumstances are, and then working together with the customer to determine whether there's a mutual fit or even a reason to proceed. So that's my idea. It's not particularly original. I think I've mined it out of many of the conversations that we've had here on the Cringe, but I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
I was one of those old school sellers, and pre-internet, we were the dispensary of information. And I remember in the early technology that I sold, people would get in line, we'd take orders, and they'd have product that was back ordered, because it was actually physical stuff like personal computers, and they couldn't find information out. They had to rely on us, and it was quite an interesting position to be in. We were the givers of information and the keepers of information, and it was really a power play for sure. And then when buyers got all the access to everything, it definitely did change. I'm refreshed by that change, because now, we have to add value. We have to add a different kind of value, so that if I can find something in talking with a prospective customer, for example, and find something that they don't know yet, and, maybe a trend that I see based on what they're saying, based on the people that I've talked with in that industry and other industries. I mean, it's wonderful when you can present that, because you really are making a difference, and you're going to be worthy of their time and their efforts and their dollars, and you'll definitely be someone that can help them on their team.
That's very well said. But doesn't that behavior require something of salespeople that must make them uncomfortable or must be difficult to do. Because if it was easy, then everybody would be doing it. And I'm coming from the perspective that, pitching is like an easy default behavior, like what you observed in the lobby in Phoenix
Yeah.
earlier this week. What's so hard about asking questions and trying to uncover circumstances as you've described?
Yeah, I was just hoping that that guy would stop talking and just ask the question. I almost moved seats, actually. I guess it's, Adam, because my dad was a pharmacist for 55 years. And my dad did what doctors do, which is, they prescribe after they understand what the issues are. And you don't just go into a doctor and they say, oh, it looks like, without the x-ray or anything, I think you have a broken arm. They're going to do an x-ray and they're going to ask you questions and they're going to find out what's wrong before they tell you how you can solve your issues. So I feel like maybe the time has come. Maybe now's the time when we're going to see, for companies to hit quotas and for companies to retain their salespeople and to keep their sales managers. We're going to see a turn of the tide where we're more buyer focused and it's not just all talk, which is what it's been for some time.
Thank you for that perspective. I agree. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the work that you've done to support women in sales. We can go deeper into the book and let's try to tie it to conversational dynamics, because I have a contention, and my guess is that you've got views on this, far more valid views than I do, that how female sellers drive a conversation is different than the way that male sellers drive a conversation. And my guess is there's some nuance there, and there's something to be learned on both sides. And one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on the show was just to parse that a little bit. As an expert in this area, I'd love to get your perspective. And I think that the people who listen to the Cringe would be very keen on that as well. So let's just start by sort of introducing, perhaps at a greater level of detail, some of the main ideas in your book.
Well, so one example I would love to give is there's this ongoing conversation that people will say about how women lack confidence in certain areas. Sometimes it comes up in the sales world. And my belief is that I think women and men that are new in a sales role, I think we all lack confidence when we go into a new company, especially if you're at the SDR, BDR level. It's your first sales role, or maybe your, second role. You have this certain amount of nervousness and you want to do whatever it takes. And you tell people like, Adam, just tell me what to do and I'll do it and I'll be fine. But sales doesn't work that way, right? It takes experience and there's an art to it and there's a science to it. So what I noticed and has been replicated many times in onboarding so many different people is that men are quieter about their anxiety, perhaps. And I think that women are more verbal. We generally are more verbal. And what a woman might say is, "Oh, I have to call Adam. I'm doing my prospecting testing or what have you, or I'm doing my new calls. I hope he accepts the call." And they're talking it out because we're raised that way. We're verbal in a lot of different situations. And a male sales leader who might be young, might be promoted from sales, will hear this and say, wow, Lori's she's not very confident. She lacks confidence because she's saying all these things, where my male counterpart might just keep his mouth shut and just get on the phone and start making calls. So I've noticed that, and I don't believe it's confidence or lack of confidence. I believe it's just the way we're wired, that women tend to be more social creatures. We're big on conversations. We have different things to, like empathy. We have a high level of empathy and I believe understanding that's different from men. Not that men lack it. and I'm trying not to make 100% generalized comments here, because I've worked with some very empathetic men over the years, and I've worked mostly with men in my career. So I have a lot of role models myself who are male and who guided me in a lot of different ways. So, but I think that's one example where you might go, wow, women are less confident because they talk so much about it. And then when you take actual conversations, and there have been studies by Gong and some other people that will show, I think one that I saw, women talk more, but they also closed more business in that example. They brought conversations to closure more than men did. So I don't know. I don't think it's men against women. I'd like to think that if women are just as good as men, I'd just like to see more of them in roles all the way through sales leadership.
I agree with you. It's not about better, but it could be about, what one could learn from the other. And so let me ask you about that. So you mentioned that, women are, in your opinion, more social, more conversational, more empathetic. That makes sense to me, having been like you in sales for a long time. What are some examples of that behavior in action? And the reason I'm asking is because I think that everybody could sort of benefit from your insight on this point.
Yeah, other things I would include collaboration. I'm the first one that wants to collaborate with someone rather than compete. Men were raised to be competitors. And it's funny, even when I say the word competition or being competitive, I think that people misinterpret that a lot. That, it's not that women are not competitive, because I'm competitive, but I compete against myself. And when I was selling, I love the leaderboard. Sometimes people say, not everybody likes the leaderboard. I love the leaderboard as long as I was in the top 10. I didn't need to be number one. That's the funny thing about a lot of women that I know, is that we don't need to be on Mount Rushmore. We don't need to be president of the United States or the company. It doesn't mean some women don't want to, and that's great. But a lot of women just want to do well, and they want to be recognized for their work. So when it comes to communication, it's interesting, because I would say another thing that plays into the whole collaborative versus competitive is ego. I think the ego factors in as well. And if you can be egoless in sales, whether you're male or female, it's a really great virtue to have, because people don't really like your ego. When people show up more important than their buyer, for example, or they act like they're better, it's really tough to deal with. And I had a situation where I won a very large deal because my predecessor was a very big ego kind of a guy, and the customer did not feel like he cared about them. And so they didn't even give him the opportunity for a very large deal. And when I came into play, I let him know that he's not here. I'm here now, and how can we work together? That collaboration caused a very large deal to happen in my early days at a new company. And that's an example of, different styles that work well together. That's why we need a balance of people. We need all sorts of different people to help with that. So if he can't hit it off with the client, maybe I can. If I can't, maybe someone else can. I think that's one good endorsement for an inclusive group on a sales team, right?
Yeah, I agree. On that point, just to perhaps ground your point in an important statistic, I believe I've heard you say in prior conversations that only 35% of entry-level sales reps are women. Do I have that right? Is that figure accurate?
I will say it's probably pretty close. It might be a little higher in some industries. The problem is that no one's really researched it lately. So I haven't seen any statistics post-pandemic, because we lost a lot of women during that time. And sometimes we still lose them in the tech sector. So technology is kind of up and down. But what we do know, Adam, is that the higher up women go in the company, beyond manager to director level and above, there are less and less women. And when you get to chief revenue officer and above, we know that it's probably closer to 11 to probably 13, 15%, I would say. And all you have to do is go on LinkedIn and type in chief revenue officer and navigator, and you see how often you run into a woman. It's pretty few and far between.
So why is that? Why such a dramatic drop off? And by the way, just to add some color to that statistic, if it's about a third of all entry level roles are filled by women, that means that men outnumber women in sales in general 2-1. And you're saying as you move up the ranks, the presence of women in executive roles in sales drops down to 10 or 11%. Why is that?
Well, there's a number of reasons. That's part of why I wrote the book, because there's a lot of societal things that are happening. Men get promoted more than women. There are some biases that people think, and some are unconscious, some are conscious. Also, some women, like I said, I don't need to be president of a big company. I don't have that desire for the drive to be at the top, like I think more men do than women do. Women that I've worked with, generally in sales and sales leadership, for example, many women in sales leadership aren't really active on LinkedIn. And again, you can look at chief revenue officers' names and, senior executives in sales who are women. And a lot of them are just busy with their teams and with their whatever they do at home, with or without kids. A lot of times it involves family, but not always. Sometimes it's community. And so it's just a different outlook. It's not necessarily this vertical climb, like I think a lot of men have learned. And also it's changing with the different ages now, right? With younger men are probably less inclined, like, the way men were raised earlier. So I think it'll be curious to see how things go in the next number of years. But I know that we need to find things for both men and women to keep them engaged and encouraged and treated like they're important at their company so that they will want to stay. So we don't have a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
And, because that is an issue for both men and women.
Yeah, agreed. And I don't have a statistic handy, but I think that sales turnover, the rate at which people turn over in sales roles, it has to be approaching an all-time high within the last couple of decades for reasons at the moment that are beyond me. But this point about ascension of women in sales organizations to the highest ranks is interesting, because it's been my experience having, managed 7 or 8 global sales organizations. It's that on average, women outperform men in sales organizations. And so I have tried in my own way to go out of my way to hire more women than the industry average would suggest, for lots of reasons. I'm the father of 2 daughters, but also I want to build a high performing sales organization. And you mentioned some things earlier that I'd like to just double click on about approaching sales calls in the modern era, with a lot of curiosity, a diagnostic disposition. And I think that relates to some things that in your opinion, you said that women arrive to a conversation with a little more naturally. And I agree with this. Things like empathy, for example, and just perhaps a little more social and conversational skill. I've held for a little while that that's part of the reason why women tend to do very well in sales roles. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were saying that, I want to go back to saying that I've worked with some amazing men who are skilled in that way too. But I think, again, whether you're male or female, what really works is when you come from a place of curiosity and not ego and not dollar signs and not thinking, oh, he's going to need my software for sure. And just without interrogating someone, but just really being curious. And people that are masterful at this can pull that off. It's another reason that, some women were turned off from sales because they didn't feel like they were gregarious enough or, loud enough. And it's just not true. You just don't need to be that to be successful in selling.
So how does that get changed? This is something I was dying to ask you, and you just put your finger right on it. So we started off the show by saying sales is often characterized as a profession that requires the seller to just do a lot of talking and do a lot of explaining. And we both agreed, for lots of reasons, that the profession has really changed, and where sales reps add value is not there anymore. It's elsewhere, right? It's in curiosity and questioning and insight and alignment on outcomes and things like that. It's almost as if the entire profession, to attract more women, which would be wonderful, just needs to advertise that fact better, that that's indeed where the skill is these days. It's not in, what you observed in the lobby in Phoenix earlier this week. How does that start to get changed?
Yeah, my hope is that by doing like our podcast where we're featuring women who are sellers and women who are sales leaders, and more interviews and other women in sales groups and communities who talk up and showcase women. There's a group that I'm really enamored with right now called Wednesday Women, and they're on LinkedIn, and they will showcase every Wednesday. They showcase a woman, and not just what she says, on LinkedIn, but just answer some questions. And that's been a really great thing. And I think they've done 60 or 70 different women so far. So just people seeing more of that, making it just more normal that we're showcasing people who are successful in sales that happen to be women is a really great step, in my opinion, because I have this hashtag see it, be it, that, you can't be what you don't see. And you kind of can, but it's hard. It's a lot easier to be what you see. I've done some things as kind of a renegade where, being a single mom and getting into sales with mostly all men and things like that. But it's easier if I have some female colleagues with me. Really, it just is. And someone to talk with and some camaraderie in that way. So the more we see it normalized that there are great women sellers, selling is an admirable profession, I think that we'll see more students, graduate from school and go into sales. Other people do it as an entry-level role or even a career changer. It goes from finance or marketing into a sales role, and sees that it's as long as you find products and services that you believe in and companies that you believe in with good managers that work with you and help develop you, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, that's so well said. I do think, though, that the way that sales gets taught, either in academic institutions or gets taught by companies who are training entry-level salespeople, I think there's a lot of catching up that has to be done. I do think that sales is taught in many institutions, many organizations, as the art of pitching, as the art of talking. And that sounds to me, just based on what you said, that until that really changes, that could just be an institutional impediment to bringing more women into the field.
You and I are both involved with the Harvard Business School, and they didn't even have a sales program until just a few years ago.
Yeah.
So we see that changing, and that was in fact the number one thing that MBA grad students said was that out in the real world they never had any sales training. So now they're getting it there. And also I think that some of the schools, there's some amazing things happening in universities where they are on the leading edge with tech companies and with corporate America working with them. So I've seen some really good examples. I've also seen some old school examples, but when you work with a lot of different colleges and universities, you get a mix. But yeah, they definitely need to retool if they haven't, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are some remarkable things happening in the academic world around sales, more so now than ever. But I am more often than I would think surprised at how much of the sales curriculum is still just a bit traditional, not contemporary in the dimensions that you and I are talking about. So tell us about your experience coaching students at HBS, what you've
Yeah,
observed.
It's been really a pleasure. I mean, we work with these really smart people who have big aspirations and big goals. And it's interesting to find some of the same concerns about sales, that they think it might be kind of slimy, kind of not so honest or authentic. And then they work with us and they gain a real great opinion of what selling is. At least that's been my experience. And they're very coachable, the folks that I've worked with, so that when we've gone through a term, they've really grown and really adopted things that we talked about throughout. And I think it's going to be a great help to them, those that have taken it and gone on.
What do you think one or two of the myths that get dispelled quickly when you're working with HBS students are? Meaning they arrive with certain preconceived notions about a sales conversation, and you go through the process of dispelling those assumptions. What are a couple of them?
One of them I'm thinking about is that when they start doing role plays, I think they think it's going to be really easy. And there's actually a lot more to it. There are a lot more components to a good sales conversation. And they're very surprised about how much talk time they should be doing and how much listening time, as well as just hitting some basic fundamentals of a good sales conversation. And they learn before they're done. They learn about it. But I think most people think it's pretty easy. Don't you?
Yes, for sure. I think many students arrive with the assumption that selling is mostly talking, kind of like we've been discussing today. And it's almost like an illuminating moment when they understand that the less you talk, the more effective you're going to be. And it's an interesting environment in which to coach people, because you're dealing with some of the best and brightest that the world produces. But even they arrive with some assumptions that are ultimately incorrect about what's a good sales conversation. So thank you for talking about that. So Lori, I want to give you an opportunity to send us out with a hot take, anything that you'd like to talk about to leave listeners with today.
I would like to leave listeners with the idea that words matter, that the words you can choose any words in the world that you've learned, and yet we say certain ones. We have crutch words, and we have words that we get comfortable with, and words that we overuse. And I want you to think about being more mindful of what you say, whether it's in writing or comes out of your mouth, because it matters. And it can affect whether you build rapport, whether you build trust, or not. So think about the words that you use and go back and any situations where it hasn't gone well, try to remember what some of those are and be mindful of the future. And I guarantee that will change conversations if you employ different words and maybe less words in some cases and maybe more powerful words.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. So Lori, thank you so much for being a guest on The Cringe. Today, my guest has been Lori Richardson, CEO and founder of Score More Sales and author of She Sells. She's also the host of a terrific podcast called Conversations with Women in Sales. Look it up. I highly recommend it. Lori, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow me, Adam Clay, on LinkedIn. I'm regularly sharing cringe-killing thoughts around the sales conversation there. This podcast is produced and presented by Rainmakers, where we believe the sales conversation is everything. Check us out online at www.rnmkrs.com.